Welcome to the Biotech Startups podcast by Exceeder. Join us as we speak with first-time founders, serial entrepreneurs, and experienced investors about the challenges and triumphs of running a biotech startup, from pre-seed to IPO, with your host, John Chi. In our last episode, we spoke with Barbara Alcaraz Silva about her journey from Mexico to the United States and how her upbringing played an important role in her path to becoming a scientist entrepreneur. We also covered her experience at UC Irvine, where she gained essential lab experience, secured a research position in plant biology, and later travelled abroad to the National Autonomous University of Mexico. If you missed it, be sure to go back and listen to part 1. In part 2, we continue our conversation with Barbara, hearing more about her academic journey and graduate school lab experience at UC Irvine. She shares insights from her time at the Beckman Laser Institute and recounts her groundbreaking research on DNA repair using lasers. Lastly, we chat about her international fellowship at King's College London, where she explored stem cell biology and how her transition to entrepreneurship was shaped by navigating different lab environments and overcoming funding challenges.
But as you're thinking about your, applying to grad school, what made you decide to ultimately go back to, I believe you're at the Beckman Laser Institute?
Yes, and that was at UC Irvine. So I love Irvine so much. I mean, I applied for a few schools. I also didn't want to move away from home that much. I mean, during college, I was living at home. 'Cause I couldn't afford to live on campus. Didn't had enough financial aid. So, and I enjoyed the time at UC Irvine, and I think that was one of the reasons, like being close to home. And I think that's also part of our family values. When you're an immigrant, it's like, okay, I have to be close to mom or to your house, right? So then you can get free food or something. Right?
Yeah.
So the idea of moving away was like a no-no to me. I was like, how am I gonna survive? Which is so interesting because then I moved from a different country too. So
It's like, I
mean,
think
it just makes no sense.
that is like that in itself is very difficult. So
Yeah, I was like, no, I'm definitely gonna stay in Irvine. So I remember applying only to a few schools, and they were like UC Riverside, UC Merced, because then I figured out that Stanford and UC Merced, they were not the same.
Yeah.
They're very different.
Yeah.
UC San Diego and, all the UC systems, because that's the only thing that I knew in all the schools in California. And then eventually, of course, I think I got everywhere except Stanford. But anyways, but I still decided to go to Irvine because they had a great umbrella program. Oh, and I applied to UCSF too, which is very interesting. Eventually, I ended up doing my postdoc at UCSF. But um, so I accepted the offer, went through the interview process, and they love all the research that I was doing, and I accepted the literally attending UC Irvine, and the reason is because they have an umbrella program where you can rotate in different labs and different departments. And you have seen me so far how much I have shared that I'm been moving around in different disciplines, right?
Yep.
So, and I think for me it was super helpful because it's like I love biology, but I'm not sure. So once I started at Irvine, then I did the same thing. Every quarter I will rotate in a different lab. My first lab was in a Drosophila lab studying Huntington's disease. I decided that I don't like to work with this.
There we go. Yes.
So neuroscience was like, I don't know if I have worked with Drosophila. Um, and then my second rotation also was doing research with mice, studying the hippocampus and all, the neuronal cell regeneration. That was interesting, but the culture of the lab wasn't a fit for me somehow. And they had so many people. I remember my project, I had to go to the lab every 3 hours literally, I remember going into midnight and then at 3 a.m. to just take, some metrics. And I just did not enjoy that project. And then eventually I rotated in the lab of one of the pioneers who, started um, developing lasers to do biology with lasers. And he was at the Beckman Institute, which is interesting is that he was not a biologist. He was more like an engineer. He did study biology, but then all his career, he was more focused on lasers, microsurgeries, and doing all of that. Um, so I joined his lab, and he was part of the developmental and cell biology department. And that's how I ended up staying and doing my PhD work with him. So that was another interesting journey.
That
Yeah.
is like, I feel like you mentioned kind of like hopping around, and it sounded like the two first labs were like not a good fit, but that's exactly what you kind of need until you found this like kind of
Exactly.
resonance. And can you talk a little bit about being in that specific lab, and whose labs was this?
Michael Burns. Yeah.
Awesome. Can you talk about
And
your research in that lab?
yeah, and he became my mentor. Um, he passed away 2 years ago, so that was a little bit hard and difficult because, I felt like he actually took me under his, under his wing and supported me. I mean, he paid for my career literally. That's little what a
That's
PI
amazing.
does, right? So he paid for my career, and um, so I joined his lab because there were a few things. He gave me an interesting project that nobody was working on, and he had no idea how to do that. And the second thing is like he had a lot of money, he had a lot of funding. So, and when you're a grad student and you hear the gossip, like, no, you need to find a lab with good funding and stay there. And also the lab culture needs to be great, right? So when somebody told me no, he has a lot of funding, I was like, I'm set.
Yeah, I'm set. I'm
I'm
set. This is
set.
perfect. Yeah, I found it. I found it.
I'm
Yeah.
not gonna struggle,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But so yeah, I joined his lab, and yeah, I remember the first couple of meetings, and probably was after a couple of weeks of me joining and getting acquainted. He's like, Barbara, I want you to study the telomere, and I want you to damage the telomere with lasers. And I'm like, how? I mean,
Yeah.
like, and that was my project. Go and
Yeah.
do it. I will go into his office and he will give me just all these. And he never shared with me, this is how you're going to do it.
Yeah.
Like, okay, the steps. Now he had another grad student who was, a few years in. She was the one who taught me how to use the lasers and do DNA repair. I mean, like we were studying DNA repair pretty much. Use all the protocols. But then at the same time, I had to develop my own protocols because it was so new. I mean, who is doing cutting DNA with lasers? That was like so antique. It's like, no, this is not innovative.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe UV, and we had a
Yeah.
UV laser.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and again, it took me some time to literally, I remember it took me 2 years. That was the most difficult project because I was like, what is the hypothesis in here? Like, no, go figure it out. So I had to read so many papers, of course, eventually my project ended up becoming like a DNA repair project where, you damage the telomeres, that delays cell division. I mean, it was all these,
Yeah.
but it
Yeah.
took me 2 years to really get into that point.
Yeah.
The benefit of being with him and have him as a mentor is that he was so connected to many research institutions. Um, and I guess when he felt comfortable of me, being in the specific stage, he was like, I want you to connect with this faculty that I've been supporting. And
Cool.
he's at Harvard. So I ended up
Cool.
collaborating with him. He became another mentor. And then he connected me with another faculty in the chemistry or chem department.
You're
And
back.
yeah, I'm back.
Yeah, I'm
And
back.
I'm telling you, all of
Yeah.
this is interconnected. And, and I think because of that, his guidance and also letting me to be independent, because not that many people, especially when you're in the academic setting, let you be independent. So he let me be independent, and literally I learned from the beginning to be very independent, manage my own mini team, because then I had undergrads that I had to manage. They work on different projects. Then I spent, and this is talking about the good days, right? Because then
Mhm.
again, struggling at the beginning. But then, I pick up on the literature. I attended a lot of conferences. Eventually, I had enough data because you need to collect data, right? I had enough research data about my project that I was able to present it in different conferences. all by myself. I mean,
That's
I didn't
awesome.
have my team, but then it was great because people, really good professors and faculty, they will come and judge my poster. It's like, okay, this is an interesting result. Or why are you doing this? So, and that's where I started gaining more knowledge. And then I published my first paper, which is in a whatever journal. I don't even. But then from there, I picked it up, and I think I ended up publishing 6 papers out of
Sweet.
my PhD thesis. Not the most amazing, high impact papers, but they were decent enough and great collaborations, and all of it because of Michael. Michael let me be free. And I remember I will go to his office and tell him, okay, this is what I'm doing, what I'm, X, Y, and Z. And at that point, I remember his eyes being so open because like, Barbara, you're so ready now. Just go and do. And I will be this student who will do whatever I wanted to do. And I will just need approval from him. And of course, his budget.
Yeah.
But at the
Amazing.
same time, because I learned to manage my budget, I ended up, getting different fellowships, you know, lots of support, conference support, like they had grants, travel grants. So I was always mindful, and I think that also helped me a lot too, because then I was writing grants, supporting myself because I was like, I know I have Michael, but I also want to show that I'm capable of getting my own funding. So that's also something that I did.
That's very cool. It almost seems like a very entrepreneurial PhD experience.
Yeah. Without not knowing what it was to be an entrepreneur, because
Yeah.
that's another story.
Yeah, because he's like, spread your wings, do your thing.
Exactly. And it was all because of Michael. So
Yeah.
I'm so grateful because Michael paid for my career, supported my family. I'm so grateful to him. So yeah.
That's
Very.
absolutely amazing. And I guess a quick question, you mentioned you started to have a team that you were responsible for. I'm going to imagine that was your first time managing. How was that
Yeah.
experience?
It's interesting because when you're a PhD, you always hear about, PhD candidate. You always hear about who are the best people that can do the research for you, pre-meds.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I wish that was the case in life, I'm sure other corporates or
Yeah.
And of course, I interviewed so many people. I don't even know how I don't think we posted it online or anything. I don't even recall how I ended up, interviewing and recruiting students. But, I had different students. And, one specifically, Jessica, who was incredible, she ended up publishing a couple papers with me. So she learned all the protocols, the procedures. I will, draft the experiments, the rationale, then a hypothesis, and we will come together to really put that project together. Right. And it's interesting because Jessica will show up 5 or 6 a.m. in the lab, again, a pre-med.
Yep. That tracks.
Very dedicated.
That tracks.
Do her experiments because we were doing a lot of cell monitoring in the microscope. So it was a lot of microscopy work. And she will do those experiments and then we'll leave and take, her classes. If she had time in the evening, then she will come back. Otherwise, I will pick up the work. And pretty much what I did, I drafted. I drafted all the findings, and that's how we ended up publishing. And then eventually, she was so good that I spent most of my time traveling and talking about our results. So, you know, and she was the only member actually, now that I think about it, because she was so efficient, so thoughtful, very dedicated. And I think recently she graduated from residency. So,
Cool.
so it's been a joy though, but yeah, so I had, you learn eventually how to manage people,
Yeah.
right? Depending of the need,
Yep.
right? Or the project or the culture, the environment. What is also their goals? Because she was like very focused. Was like, I want to get into grad school. So it's like, perfect. I know that one of the requirements is for you to do research. Let's do the best. So then your name can be in one of our publications. And she ended up having 2 publications, which were super
Amazing.
helpful in her resume. So the same, you focus on their skill sets, whether if it's a fit, where do they want to go? Because, besides her, I also gave my time back to mentor all the other students, especially the students from the minority science program, because, at the time now I was a grad student, I was
Yep.
no longer an undergrad. So, so giving a lot of guidance and figuring out where they wanted to go. Because if somebody said, by the way, I have no interest in going into grad school, so then I don't think being in a research publication will help you, right?
Yep.
So you need to define that and figure that out as well.
It really sounds like these are like, I think about even how we think about like professional development at Exeter, or just like startups and just company building and stuff like that. That is exactly what you were going through in grad school. It's like figuring out like, what is their motivation? What is their why? And how do we appeal to their why? And then you give
Exactly.
them room to run. It sounds like, and
Yeah.
then that freed you up to do what was, I'm going to imagine going out, communicating, talking about the science is something that, is something that's you can tap in and you can do, that's uniquely your strength. And giving them the opportunity to kind of do what they're good at. So that's very, very cool to hear. And as you're wrapping up your time at, for your PhD program, I know you also had a fellowship at King's College London. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, and again, me trying to learn something different because I love my PhD work and thesis. It was so focused on telomeres and DNA repair. And at the time, there was the group globally. I mean, like literally, if you see the scientists now, I think it's a little bit bigger than that, especially with CRISPR, right? But
Yep.
at the time, the group of DNA repair it was a very small group that you can tell who were the top scientific, the top scientists or the top institutions, right? So but I always had a curiosity for stem cell biology, and I remember at the time, I was connecting, having a discussion with one of the directors of the MSP program, the Minority Science program, where they had this fellowship and research abroad in London, and I was like, and at the time it was a good time for me to try that and do that, and to be honest, and I felt like I needed to get away from the US. It was just, I was very hands down, very focused on doing all these studying and research and I just needed to explore more. So I applied, of course. I this time I was the one who chose the lab. And me, again, being ignorant and not knowing. So I went into their website and I said, I want to work with Fiona Watts. And Fiona Watt, she is one of the pioneers of stem cell biology. Again, I mean, I was like, okay, well, what are the chances of me
Yeah.
getting into the lab? She, had a lab in Cambridge and then moved to London to open the stem cell center at King's College. And
Cool.
actually was in the hospital called the Guy's Hospital, the top of the tower. That's where she, initially started, um, expanding and, putting together her lab in London. So of course, I got the yes and approval, got my travel fellowship and all of that. So I joined the lab and it was incredible because then you had international students. The time in London, it was incredible because it's like here in the US, I felt like I was like any other Mexican. If you didn't know who I was or what I did or whether if I had a PhD in London, it was like, "Oh, you're a scientist. Great. That's the
Cool.
priority, right?" And the second thing they will say is like, "Oh, you have an American accent." And I'm like,
Like, I didn't know that.
"Wait."
That's
Um,
really
so
cool. Like one thing that like, just really stood out to me is like, and I after having conversations with other leaders like yourself, it seems that they're like, there's a kind of I'm doing a little bit of pattern matching here, but just like there are these like very monumental emails or just like messages, like cold outreach that open up an crazy amount of opportunity. You're like, we'll see what happens, sending it. And then you end up
Exactly.
finding yourself in the UK.
Exactly. And that was a great experience. Loved it. Loved the project. It was, it was interesting for me to get acquainted with, some systems and even the sector, because of course that wasn't my expertise. My project was, very simple, to be honest. Um, One of the things that I learned immediately is like, because I was thinking at the time where I wanted to go. I knew that I wanted to do a postdoc, but I wasn't sure. And I think being in England and London gave me tremendous experience. I learned pretty quickly that that's an interesting country where people have fun. Like
Yeah.
they do a lot, and I
Yeah.
wasn't cut up for that. So
Yeah.
and also I didn't have family there.
Yeah.
Um, but I think you know, science is incredible. There's a lot of opportunity, and the fact that I felt super welcome, it was great. And then eventually, I started looking for postdoc positions, so I finished my time there, and then actually no, before I finished my time, because I was looking for a postdoc position, I remember reaching out to different faculty, different institutions, and again, I went back to Stanford.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, I'm not gonna give up.
Yeah.
And
Second,
I
third time
remember,
the charm. I'm gonna,
yes, oh my
yeah,
God.
I'm gonna make this happen.
And I found this faculty who was also doing um, DNA repair, but she was looking at the chromatin modifications of the DNAs, like when your DNA gets super packed and then when
Yep.
you unpack the DNA. So I thought that was interesting. Reach out, because at the time, you usually reach out with your attach your resume and you explain why you will be great or why you have interest in the lab. And then also I sent my resume to a faculty at UCSF. Um, and both of them reply. The faculty, because I put my phone number, the professor at UCSF actually called me directly into my phone.
Oh,
It
wow.
didn't pick up because I never pick up phone
Yeah.
because I
You're
see
like, well, I
that
don't recognize
weird,
this.
this is what 415 is like, I
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
know. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I was in London, literally. It's
Yeah.
like, who?
Like, this is gonna be really expensive. I don't know if I'm gonna pick this up. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so he called me, left a message, and then sent me an email
Oh,
saying
wow.
that he was literally working, on, DNA repair in the telomeres. He read some of my papers. He was
Oh,
interested to get a hold of me because he was using a different system. Remember that I use
yep.
lasers to damage
Yep.
the DNA? And so he was using endonucleases to cut the DNA. And he's like, I think, we'll love for you to come and see the lab or find a way to collaborate if you're still interested or if you're still in that lab. He thought that I still was in Irvine. But literally, he knew that I was in London, and I was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
well, and I got so excited because first of all, he left me a voicemail and then sent me a note, which was great.
That's amazing.
So yeah, and the faculty at Stanford equally great. Sent also a note. I think it was like weeks later or so, but and then when I went back to California, of course, I did my tours, and you had to present your project and give an entire like seminar, right? And I felt like at Stanford, I was like pitching myself too much. I was like,
Mm.
"Okay, this is who I am, and this is why I'm so great, blah, 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 blah." And versus at UCSF, it was the opposite. I mean, and I don't think I gave a presentation actually, which is very interesting. I have to, you know,
Well, I
uh,
mean, you kind of did a presentation already with your papers that you already published.
right?
Like,
So
your professor was already like, no, 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 no.
yeah,
I've read all your papers already. This is like, I
yeah.
got a
So
feeling.
and again, and his name is John Murnane. He retired a few years back. He was emeritus faculty. He became emeritus faculty, and he collaborated with Liz Blackburn. So it was a great experience because
Badass.
I ended up going into his lab. The lab environment, it was incredible. All the colleagues, the other, he only had postdocs, um, and he was so dedicated because he will be the professor and the faculty that will be doing experiments, which is very interesting. He will
Yeah.
literally do experiments, and he will teach me everything himself, which it was
Wow.
great because I didn't have that during my PhD.
Yeah.
My PI literally told me, okay, go and figure it out. And the other hand, here I find myself older, a little bit more experienced, I guess, with an older professor who is not
Still in the
continuing
lab.
us. Yeah, it's still in the lab.
Yeah.
So it was incredible experience, and I loved it. And I didn't spend too much time because we ran out of funding.
Mhm. And
So it was
that's the dichotomy, right? I think,
right?
you were on either end of the spectrum. You're in like
Yeah.
super well funded, and
Oh,
then
yes. And then
not so.
exactly. And then I also brought my own grant when,
Yeah.
but it's not only that, right? It's like, how do we support the lab? And
Yep.
so we had to shut down, literally.
Yeah.
It was very sad, but yeah, it was an incredible experience. And at the same time, because I was back in San Francisco, my first time living in the city, where I realized like, wow, this is super expensive. How
Yeah. Yeah.
and being a postdoc, it was incredible. It was like it was a great experience, but also it was very hard. So yeah, and and then from there it took me to do different things and become an entrepreneur because I needed to become an entrepreneur.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes necessity is like what it takes. And
Exactly.
I think too, something that stood out to me about you're talking about like lab cultures, and like it's incredibly important to find that culture that fits. And you're talking about as you're doing rotations at UC Irvine, you listen to your gut. You're like, these ones not a cultural fit for me. And I feel like if you fight that gut, kind of like listening to your gut, you're in for a world of pain. I find, at least for me, I'm speaking personally now, but anytime I have like the gut feeling that this is not it, every time I like override that with my mind, it ends up being the wrong decision. You're just like, should have listened to the gut there. And it's like, because your gut, there's it might be a more qualitative or subconscious element to this. And I like that you went with like, this feels right, the culture's right. And it doesn't always pan out like, right, not every lab is going to be super well funded. It's it just happens to be that way. So that totally is the kind of how it unfolds.
That's all for this episode of the Biotech Startups podcast. We hope you enjoyed our discussion with Barbara Alcaraz Silva. Tune in for part 3 of our conversation to learn more about her journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with your friends. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to having you join us again on the Biotech Startups podcast for part 3 of Barbara's story. The Biotech Startups podcast is produced by Exceeder. Don't want to miss an episode? Search for the Biotech Startups podcast wherever you get your podcasts and click subscribe. Exceeder provides research labs with equipment leases on founder-friendly terms to support paths to exceptional outcomes. To learn more, visit our website www.exceder.com. On behalf of the team here at Exceeder, thanks for listening. The Biotech Startups podcast provides general insights into the life science sector through the experiences of its guests. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from the podcast is at the user's own risk. The views expressed by the participants are their own and are not the views of Exceeder or sponsors. No reference to any product, service, or company in the podcast is an endorsement by Exceeder or its guests.